Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, students. Assalamu alaikum. Can you listen me and can you see the shared screen? If yes, then please respond and chat. Thank you, Dania. Thank you, Bushra. Thank you, Mariam. Thank you, Aviba. So, student, we are continuing our topic of respiration. Okay, and we will on the slide number 33, I guess. So, showing you that slide number 33, and starting from that. In the last lecture, we have discussed about the spirogram, okay, and the lungs volumes and capacities through which we can understand how our lungs are functioning. What are the functional reserves? What are the volumes? That is the inspiratory reserve volume, expiratory reserve volume, tidal volume, and residual volume. And what are the capacities? Capacities are the sum of those volume and the understanding of them and their testing, and if they comes within the normal ranges or beyond it, then it will explain that if a person if a person's lungs is not working well or working well. So this was the last slide. Now it is important that you need to understand that the only 70% of the tidal volume, only 70% of the tidal volume reaches the respiratory zone. What is the meaning of that? It means that let's suppose that the tidal volume is 500 ml. So only from that 350 ml of fresh air reaches the conducting reaching the respiratory zone where the active ventilation is going on, whereas 30% remains in the conducting zone, that is 150 ml is the used air. So tidal volume 500 ml, 350 ml fresh air, more and more having oxygen, but 150 ml that used air that remains trapped in the conducting zone. So this is because there are anatomic or respiratory dead spaces in our respiratory system. These are actually the conducting airways, the passageways of the air that does not undergo respiratory gases exchange. Okay, so we have previously discussed the minute ventilation. Minute ventilation is the amount of the air in or out in a normal quiet breathing, also known as the tidal volume multiplied by the breath rate. For example, if the breath rate is 12 and the tidal volume is 500 ml, the minute ventilation will be 6 liter per minute. But there are another rate that is known as the alveolar ventilation rate. Now, alveolar ventilation rate gives you an idea about the volume of air per minute that actually reaches the respiratory zone, and that is 350 ml out of 500 ml actually multiplied by 12. So this gives you an idea that around about 4.5 liters of the actual air, fresh air reaches the respiratory zone. Okay, and 1.5 liter doesn't do it. Now inspiratory reserved volume is that volume when you take the breath over and above the tidal volume. Maximum capacity at which you will fill your lungs with the fresh air is known as the inspiratory reserved volume. And it is more and more in athletes, it is more and more in persons associated with the yoga, or healthy persons, or young persons, males, tall persons. So for that, more inspiratory reserved volume is there in patients, in respiratory patients, in females, in children, in old age patients, in patients with a short stature, or normal persons are having decreased respiratory reserved volume in comparison with already give you that male and the aerobics and yoga doing persons. Now, it is also important that in the expired air Oxygen is also there. Very huge quantity of the oxygen is remains in the expired air because we are having only few percentage of the air from the atmosphere into our lungs. So that air that we expire also got oxygen in more and more quantities. Okay, so lung volume, expiratory reserved volume, when you inhale normally and exhale forcefully, then you will deliberately decrease the air inside your lungs through the voluntary action, and that amount of that air which is over and above the normal tidal volume exhaled from your lungs with the extra effort is known as the expiratory reserved volume. It is important because more and more expiratory reserved volume, then again you will fill your lungs with fresh air more and more. So when you are going for deep breathing, for example, before diving or before holding your breath, that increased expiratory and inspiratory reserved volume will give you more amount of air, fresh air that can be trapped in your lungs, and more and more oxygenation will be there. Abdul Sattar Babar have asked a question that, sir, no difference between young and the old person. Definitely there is a difference. In young persons muscles are functional, more functional. In old age there is a aging process and the muscles are getting weak. Okay, so muscles of the respiration decreased, then there is decreased volume and capacities, and there is decreased holding capacity of the breath by the lungs. In young person it is more. Now residual volume is the volume of the air that remains after expiratory reserved volume exhaled. So residual volume is that amount of the air which you cannot expired out. Even you try so hard to expire that air out of your lungs, some amount of the air remains into your lungs, approximately 1.1 to 1.2 liter, to keep the airways open and to prevent the collapse. Then vital capacity is the inspiratory reserved volume plus tidal volume plus expiratory reserved volume. Vital capacity denotes to that volume that are under your control. Okay, you can control your inspiratory reserved volume, expiratory, and tidal. But total lung capacity is the vital capacity plus the residual capacity, and that residual capacity is that air which you cannot get a hold of it, you cannot expire it. So when it's added to the vital capacity, it gives you a total lung capacity. And as far as generally speaking, one time holding breath of our lungs is approximately 6 liters. Lungs can take up a journal at journal, the lungs can take up approximately 6 liter of the volume. And out of that 6 liter, approximately 5 liter is under the vital capacity, approximately, whereas total 6 liters are the total lung capacity. ठीक है, अस्मा बेटे पहले आपका माइक ऑन हो गया था, प्लीज इसको ऑफ रखें. Now, we have covered the Boyle's law that indicate the correlation between the volume and the pressure of the gases in the inverse proportionality. Now we have different laws like Dalton's law and Henry's law. Explaining you Dalton's law first. Dalton's explained that each gas in a mixture of gases exerts its own pressure as if no other gas were present. And it also stated that the pressure of a specific gas is in the mixture is known as partial pressure. Full pressure is the sum or total of all the gases present into the mixture. For example, when we are talking about the air is a mixture of gases: nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide, water vapor, and other noble gases. So in atmospheric pressure, that is 760 of millimeter of mercury, there are actually partial pressure of all the gases, like most the partial pressure being exerted by the nitrogen, then the oxygen, then the water vapors and the carbon dioxide. And also the partial pressure, more the partial pressure, more will be the dissolution, or more will be the diffusion of the gases across a permeable membrane. But here comes the question. Here comes the question that, okay, sir, are you saying that the nitrogen got more and more partial pressure? Okay, you can see in the next slide, nitrogen got 597.4 millimeter of partial pressure. So does that nitrogen actually dissolve in our blood? No. Why? Because the partial pressure is very important thing, but not only thing. Partial pressure plus solubility plus the molecular weight. These three factors govern the solubility of gases through a semi-permeable membrane. Nitrogen, although it have got more partial pressure, 597.4 millimeter of mercury, but it is a very large molecule and it is having very less solubility. So for that reason, at the 760 millimeter of mercury or 1 atmosphere or at the sea level, nitrogen is not able to diffuse through the membranes. But nitrogen can do it in 2 atmosphere. More, it can do it in 3 or 4 or 5 atmosphere. How we get that atmosphere? When we go deep into the sea, after 32 feet, 1 atmosphere will be converted into 2 atmosphere. After further 32 feet, it will be 3 atmosphere. So down you go. More chances of nitrogen to get enter your body and causes nitrogen sickness, decompression sickness or bends. So, atmospheric pressure, 760 millimeter of mercury is a combination of the partial pressure of nitrogen, oxygen, water vapor, and carbon dioxide. Each gas diffuses across a permeable membrane. From there, where the partial pressure is greater to area where the partial pressure is less. It actually indicates that the movement of the gases is through the concentration gradient, and more the concentration gradient from the area of higher concentration, the gas will move from that area to the area of lower concentration. The more the difference, the faster the rate of flow. Here you can see a chart which gives an idea about the total partial pressure of the air, which is a mixture of gases, and how much is the individual partial pressure of gases. So nitrogen 78.6% in the air, so it have got 597.4 millimeter of mercury partial pressure. Oxygen 20.9% in the air, okay, it have got 158.8 millimeter of mercury. Water vapors 0.4% in the air, so it have got 3 millimeter of mercury total contribution to that 760 millimeter of mercury in the air. Carbon dioxide 0.04% in the air, got a partial pressure 0.3 millimeter of mercury, and other remaining gases, they have contributed to 0.5 millimeter of mercury. The sum total is 760 millimeter of mercury, most for the nitrogen and least for the other gases, least for the carbon dioxide. Okay, but as we have discussed earlier, partial pressure is not the only thing that is required for the diffusion of the gases across a membrane. Other things are the size of the molecule. More the size, difficult will be the diffusion. Less the size, easier will be the diffusion. And solubility. Carbon dioxide is 24 times more soluble than oxygen. Carbon dioxide is 24 times more soluble than oxygen. Carbon dioxide is very less, having less partial pressure 0.3, and a larger molecule in comparison with the oxygen. CO2 is greater in volume as a molecule than the O2, but that lipid, that solubility that the carbon dioxide got, enables its faster diffusion. Okay, now, quantity of a gas that will dissolve in a liquid or diffusion of the gas from the air into a medium is proportional to the partial pressure of the gas plus its solubility as measure. Higher partial pressure gas over a liquid, higher solubility. For example, oxygen in the atmosphere 158.8, that is 159 millimeter of mercury, that can easily dissolve into the atmosphere, into the alveolus air, because the alveolus air and the pulmonary capillaries have the partial pressure of the oxygen 105 millimeter of mercury. So from 158.8 to 105, it is easy. Carbon dioxide in the pulmonary capillaries 45 millimeter of mercury, and in the atmosphere it is zero point 0.3 millimeter of mercury. So from 45, the air carbon dioxide will move to zero point 0.3 millimeter of mercury in the atmosphere. So this is how it works. Higher the partial pressure of the gas over a liquid and higher solubility, more gas will stay in the solution. Now, against that partial pressure, the solubility is again a very important marker. More the solubility, more will be the diffusion of the gases. We have discussed earlier that the carbon dioxide is more dissolved in the blood than the oxygen, because the carbon dioxide is 24 times more soluble. 24 times more soluble. The water solubility of the carbon dioxide is more. Even though the air we breathe is mostly nitrogen, very little dissolve in the blood. So negligible amount of the nitrogen, although it have got most powerful partial pressure,
Actually,
597. Please off your mic, Asma. So it has got more partial pressure, but what happened that as the solubility and molecular size is more and solubility is less, so carbon dioxide is very little dissolved, but it dissolve when you go from that 1 atmosphere to the 2 atmosphere or 3 atmosphere deep sea. Decompression thickness is there, bands is there, and the divers, deep seas and divers also are experiencing that, and that is going to make trouble for the body, because nitrogen is generally not required in the form of gas for our body. We have no use of that nitrogen. Then oxygen diffuses from the alveolar air into the blood, from first from the atmospheric into the alveolus or and the pulmonary capillaries, that is 158 to 105, and then from the 105 the blood goes into the systemic capillaries where the tissues take that oxygen, and in the systemic capillaries when deoxygenated blood generates. Reach, please off your mic. When in the systemic circulation, if the wait for a moment. Okay. So when the cells of the body, tissues of the body take that extra amount of the oxygen present in the blood and convert that oxygenated blood into deoxygenated blood, the partial pressure of the oxygen drops from that 100 millimeter of mercury that is initially present in the oxygenated blood in the systemic capillaries towards 40 millimeter of mercury of oxygen, and then that venous blood or deoxygenated blood goes into the first into the right side of the heart and then to the lungs, and ultimately get oxygenated again. So a small amount of the mixing of the blood from the conducting division. Acha, we have discussed the oxygen diffuses from the alveolar air, that is the alveolar air contain the partial pressure of oxygen 105 millimeter of mercury into blood of the pulmonary capillaries. Here deoxygenated blood was there initially. The partial pressure was 40 millimeter in deoxygenated blood. Then diffusion continues until the partial pressure in the pulmonary capillary blood is equal to the partial pressure of the alveolar air, that is 105 millimeter of mercury. But it will go to the region where the partial pressure is equal, slightly drop and equal to the 100 millimeter of mercury. And why is that? Because in the lungs we have well ventilated area having partial pressure of 105, and we have poor ventilated areas, for example conducting division, that have lesser quantities of the oxygen. So when the small amount of the blood mixes from the conducting division with the respiratory division or ventilation division, the PO2 drops down a little, and it drops down from 105 to 100 millimeter of mercury, and systemic capillaries contain that 100 millimeter of mercury partial pressure that goes into the body, and then the tissues take up and resulted in the drop from the 100 to the 40 millimeter of mercury. As far as the carbon dioxide is concerned, carbon dioxide diffuses from the deoxygenated blood in the pulmonary capillaries and into the alveolar air. So in the body systemic capillaries, the carbon dioxide was initially 40 millimeter of mercury. Then through the internal respiration process, the food, that is glucose, is being combusted with oxygen. As a result, carbon dioxide, water vapor, and ATP produced. That carbon dioxide will be sent or diffused from the cells and tissues into the systemic capillaries, and here from the 40 millimeter of mercury, now the partial pressure of the carbon dioxide will increase to 45, and then with the circulation of the blood, the veins carry blood from that systemic circulation into the heart, the left side of it, the right side of it, and again into the pulmonary vessels, where 45 millimeter of mercury carbon dioxide pressure is there, and in the atmosphere there is only 3 millimeter of mercury carbon dioxide is there. So this will create a concentration gradient, and the carbon dioxide diffuses until from 45 it remains at 40, and this is the partial pressure of the carbon dioxide which is present in the systemic capillaries all over the body. So the cycle of the partial pressure of carbon dioxide, it rotates, or it continues from that 45 to 40, and then 45 to 40, and then 45 to 40 mark. Whereas for oxygen it will goes from 105 to 100 to 40, again 105, then 100 to 40. It continues until the PCO₂ blood reaches to 40. Now, the next slide. Next slide will show you internal respiration in the tissues throughout the body. Oxygen diffuses from the systemic capillary blood 100 millimeter of mercury into tissues, that is 40 millimeter of mercury, and cell continuously use oxygen to make ATP. Blood drops the oxygen partial pressure from 100 towards the 40 millimeter of mercury, and then that blood, the deoxygenated blood, is sent towards the heart and the lungs for oxygenation. Carbon dioxide diffuses from the tissue cells. There are high in the carbon dioxide concentration because of the uh, internal respiration process, and that increase PO2 CO2 45 millimeter of mercury, it goes into the systemic capillaries that was initially having only 40 millimeter of mercury partial pressure of carbon dioxide. So that is an increment on that 5 of mercury increment. Cell continuously make carbon dioxide and send it to the systemic capillaries. So the blood CO2 in the systemic capillaries reaches to 45 millimeter of mercury from 40, and then it will goes and then shed its 20 and its 5 millimeter of mercury increment into the atmosphere. At rest, only 25% of the available oxygen is used, and deoxygenated blood will retain 75% of its oxygen capacity. Now, this is very important sentence. We have to understand that. See, we have discussed that the partial pressure in the capillaries or red blood, and in the systemic capillaries or oxygenated blood, red blood, got 100 millimeter of mercury partial pressure. We have discussed that in venous blood, blue blood, or deoxygenated blood, the partial pressure is 40. Okay, but as far as the percentage of the oxygen is concerned, in venous blood, in deoxygenated blood, so called deoxygenated blood, there is oxygen. There is oxygen. And how much oxygen? 75% of the total oxygen that was initially present in the systemic circulation will be there. 75%. Only 25% of the oxygen will be taken by the cells of the body, tissues of the body. So it means that if the partial pressure of the 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 blood which is present into the systemic capillaries is 100, at that moment the oxygen percentage is also 100. But when the partial pressure of the oxygen that drops down in the veins from that 100 into the 40 millimeter of mercury, the percentage of the oxygen do not drops to that 40 millimeter of mercury extent. It drops down from 100 to 75 only. So it means that the oxygenation process in the lungs is only account for the 25% of the oxygen reimbursement of only the 25% of the oxygen. Okay, so it means that deoxygenated blood got 75% of the oxygen, and oxygenated blood got 100% of the oxygen. Okay, class, hold for a moment, please. Sorry class, I was taking an important call. अच्छा, तो ये स्लाइड अब जरा गौर से देखिए. ये स्लाइड जो है आपको बता रही है क्या चीज के oxygen or carbon dioxide, what is actually the difference in the partial pressures. So see, in the atmosphere 159 or 158.8 or 159 millimeter of the oxygen is there, and in the atmosphere only zero point 0.3 millimeter of mercury partial pressure of carbon dioxide is there. Okay, then this air is inhaled. Okay, as the oxygen present in the alveolar air is only 105. So it means that from 159, the oxygen rush in. Initially, when the blue blood is there, only 40 millimeter of the mercury of oxygen will be there initially. But with having the atmospheric air and increased oxygenation, it will reaches from that 40 mark toward the 105 millimeter of mercury mark. Okay, and then here it returns to the left atrium, the oxygenated blood through the pulmonary vein. And as we have discussed that we have the well ventilated and poor ventilated divisions. So the oxygen concentration drops initially from that 105 marks towards the 100 millimeter of mercury mark. So 100 millimeter of mercury is now present in as a oxygenated blood in the systemic capillaries over here, 100 millimeter of mercury. Then here we can say that 100 millimeter of mercury of the partial pressure of the oxygen is being taken up by the tissues. And here the partial pressure of the mercury in the blue blood is drops from that 100 towards the 40 millimeter of mercury deoxygenated blood. And then that deoxygenated blood is being sent towards the right side of the heart with the superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, and coronary sinus. And that you can see over here is 40 millimeter of mercury of oxygen, and it returns to the lungs through the pulmonary capillaries. Here 40 millimeter, here the oxygenation process is started. You can see the purple patch here. The red purple patch is the patch between the blue and the red one, the blue blood and the red one. Here you can see the oxygenation being going on, and from 40 it will reach to 105, then again 100, then 40, then again it reaches to the pulmonary 105, 140. The cycle continues. As far as the carbon dioxide is concerned, carbon dioxide, here you can see in the systemic circulation the cells are having the carbon dioxide high concentration. So these cells from the initially 45 millimeter of mercury send the oxygen, the carbon dioxide into the vessels where have initially the carbon dioxide percentage of carbon dioxide partial pressure was 40 millimeter of mercury. You can see over here 40 millimeter. So from here it reaches from 40 to 45. It reaches again in the blue blood, it reaches into the systemic circulation where that 5 millimeter of mercury carbon dioxide excessive pressure was sent into the atmosphere. And from 45 now it drops down to the 40 millimeter of mercury. And then that same 40 millimeter of mercury carbon dioxide gas partial pressure maintains in the systemic capillaries. So for the carbon dioxide, this cycle continues from 40, 45 in the systemic capillaries, 40 in the deoxygenated blood or in the pulmonary vessels, 45. And then that excessive 5 quantity will be transferred from the alveolar air into the atmosphere. Atmosphere got very low partial pressure of carbon dioxide, that is equal to only zero point 0.3. So this is the cycle. Now, rate of the pulmonary and the systemic gases exchange. On which criteria, on which things on which factors actually the rate of the pulmonary and the systemic gas exchanges depends. It depends on various things. First of all, depends on partial pressure of the gases. More partial pressure, more will be the diffusion. Alveolar partial pressure must be higher than the blood partial pressure of oxygen for diffusion. So in the alveolar air, partial pressure is 105. In the atmospheric air, partial pressure is 158. And in the systemic capillaries, the partial pressure is 100. So when you go in increasing altitudes like 4,000 feet, 5,000 feet, 10,000 feet, 12,000 feet, more height you go, more difficult to breathe because the partial pressure of the oxygen in the atmosphere as well as in the alveolar air drops down. So this is the how the breathing is difficult in the area situated on higher altitudes. Now second thing, surface area. More surface area, easier will be the diffusion, easier will be the gas exchange. So for the persons having emphysema, for the person having a destructive alveolar wall, the surface area will be decreased, and as well as the diffusion of the gases will be less. Then the diffusion distress. Diffusion distress is actually the thickness of the membrane. More the thickness, it is very difficult for the gases to barge in, to diffuse in. So in cystic fibrosis, or in any case where the alveolar walls are getting damaged by smoke, by nicotine, or by any other pollutants, air pollutants, or any other genetic factor, if there is hardening and thickness increment in the capillary and the respiratory membrane that was initially zero point 0.5 micron only, if there is an increased thickness, there will be difficulty in breathing, and there is decreased dissolution of the gases. And then molecular weight and solubility. More the molecular weight, lesser will be the solubility. Generally oxygen got a lower molecular weight. Okay, so oxygen should go diffuse more easily, but what is the thing, that the carbon dioxide diffuses easily than oxygen, because the carbon dioxide, actually it is a larger molecule, but it is more soluble. It is 24 times more soluble than the oxygen. So apart from that increased size, carbon dioxide dissolve well. So when diffusion is slow, hypoxia occurs before hypercapnia. What is that hypoxia? Hypoxia is the decrease of the oxygen in the tissues. Hypoxemia, decrease of oxygen in the blood. Hypercapnia, increase carbon dioxide in the blood. When the carbon dioxide is blood is increased, it will result in respiratory acidosis. And to cover that, to manage that, the rate and the depth of the breathing will be increased. Now, oxygen transported majorly 98.5% of it with the help of the hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is a macromolecule majorly composed of a protein part, that is globin, and the prosthetic group or metallic part, that is heme. Heme is actually made up of the derivative of the iron. Now what we have over here, that we require a transportation mechanism for the safe and effective delivery of the oxygen towards the cell. Why we do not require that oxygen directly get diffused in the plasma? Only 1.5% is in the plasma, and 98.5% moves with the hemoglobin. Because if the oxygen get more and more dissolve in the plasma, it will go for oxidation. It will go for oxidation, and that oxidation is a destructive process, because it can create the reactive oxygen species, superoxides and peroxides, and these are very, very dangerous species. So oxygen will be carried out 98.5 with the help of the hemoglobin. So hemoglobin should take the oxygen in such a manner that it will take the oxygen where there is higher partial pressure of the oxygen, and it will diffuse it where the oxygen partial pressure is less. So it means that it takes the oxygen in the pulmonary vessels and it leaves the oxygen in the systemic vessels. The heme portion of the hemoglobin contains 4 iron atoms, and each iron atom can hold one oxygen molecule. So overall, eight oxygen atom or 4 oxygen molecules are carried by one hemoglobin molecule. When the hemoglobin combines with the oxygen, it is known as oxyhemoglobin, and only dissolved portion. So when the hemoglobin is taken up or holding the oxygen cannot diffuse. In order to free that oxygen, the hemoglobin should leave the oxygen, and then that free oxygen can diffuse out of the blood into the cell. So it means that the oxygen must be in such a way that it can associate or dissociate from the hemoglobin. So here hemoglobin associate with the oxygen when there is higher partial pressure of the oxygen, and it dissociate from the hemoglobin when there is lower partial pressure and there is acidity. Now you can see over here is a diagram that shows you transport of the oxygen as well as transport of carbon dioxide. See, in the alveolar air, through that oxygen diffuses 100% of it, and from that 100% only 1.5% dissolve in the form of the plasma. oxygen gas dissolve in the plasma, and 98%, 98.5% dissolve, not dissolved but carried by the hemoglobin in the pulmonary capillaries. So what happened that oxyhemoglobin carry the blood, the oxygen in the oxygenated blood. It goes to the left atrium, then the left ventricle, and then to the systemic circulation in the form of HbO, oxyhemoglobin. Here the hemoglobin dissociate, that here the hemoglobin dissociate the oxygen, and the oxygen from the hemoglobin as well as the oxygen from the plasma 1.5% and 98.5% diffuses from from the systemic capillaries into the tissues, and in return now the hemoglobin is getting free. So some amount of the carbon dioxide, actually 23% of the carbon dioxide, get bind with that free hemoglobin to convert it from hemoglobin to carb amino hemoglobin. Rest of the carbon dioxide will move through the plasma and in the form of bicarbonate ion. The CO2 in the form of gas, 7% of it directly dissolve in the plasma. Remember, in the form of gas, oxygen was in the plasma only 1.5%, but the carbon dioxide gas is 7% in the plasma. Then majority of the carbon dioxide dissolve with the water in the plasma and convert into carbonic acid first, and then dissociate in the form of proton and HCO3 ion. Proton remains in the hemoglobin and RBCs, whereas the HCO3 diffuse out and enters into the plasma. As the plasma is 55% water, so HCO3 water soluble, it travels along. Okay, so carbon dioxide travels in the blood in three forms. One, 7% in the form of gas dissolved in the plasma. Second, 23% bind to the hemoglobin in the form of carbaminohemoglobin. And third, 70% converted in the form of bicarbonate. And then these three you can see over here in the blue blood, the deoxygenated blood present in the pulmonary arteries. Here 7% carbon dioxide goes to the alveolus out from the body, 23%. Here the hemoglobin leaves the carbon dioxide, get free, and that carbon dioxide 23% again go to the alveolar air, goes out from the body, and that bicarbonate also that is present initially over here, bicarbonate joins proton again, joins proton again to form carbonic acid. HCO3 joins with proton, H positive, to create H2CO3, and that H2CO3 dissociates into carbon dioxide gas and water vapors, and same water vapor and carbon dioxide are exhaled from the lungs or from the alveolar air into the atmosphere. So this was the transportation of the gases through that. So class, we have only 1 minute left. मैं क्लास यहाँ पे भी एंड कर रहा हूँ. नेक्स्ट इसी लिंक पे क्लिक करके दूसरी क्लास में आ जाएं ताकि हम वहाँ पे इसको कंक्लूड करें और सवाल जवाब करें. So come, I am ending class right now. Click on the same link to join to start new class.